The rain hit like bullets against Nora Sinclair's face as she stumbled through the darkness. Her horse long since collapsed 2 miles back, leaving her to navigate the treacherous mountain pass on foot with nothing but lightning flashes to guide her way. She had been traveling for 3 weeks since burying her husband in an unmarked grave outside Reno. And now the storm that had been threatening all afternoon had finally unleashed its full fury upon the Sierra Nevada, turning the narrow trail into a river of mud that threatened to sweep her off the mountain with each desperate step. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago. Her soaked dress clung to her skin like ice, and she knew with certainty that she would not survive the night if she did not find shelter soon. The year was 1876, and Nora had learned in her 24 years that survival often came down to moments like these, where the line between living and dying was as thin as the next breath. Her husband, Thomas, had died from pneumonia after they had lost everything in a failed mining venture, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a wedding ring she had already sold for supplies. She had been trying to reach her sister in Sacramento when the storm caught her in the mountains above Truckee, and now even that desperate hope seemed to be slipping away as her legs trembled beneath her and her vision began to blur. Then, through the sheets of rain, she saw it. A light. Faint and flickering, but unmistakably real, glowing from what appeared to be a cabin set back from the trail among a stand of pines. Nora did not allow herself to think about whether the occupants would be kind or cruel, whether they would help her or turn her away. She simply put one foot in front of the other, using the last reserves of her strength to climb the small rise toward that beacon of hope. She nearly fell against the wooden door, her fist pounding weakly against the rough-hewn planks. For a terrible moment, there was no response, and she wondered if she had imagined the light, if hypothermia was already playing tricks on her mind. Then the door swung open, and she found herself looking up at a man who stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled the door frame and dark hair plastered to his forehead, from where he had apparently just come in from tending to animals. "Please," Nora managed to gasp, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form words. "I need shelter, just for the night. My horse is dead and I cannot go any further." The man, Ethan Ramsey, took in the sight before him with eyes the color of storm clouds. He saw a woman half dead from exposure, her lips blue, her whole body shaking uncontrollably, her dark hair hanging in wet ropes around a face that would have been beautiful if it were not twisted with cold and exhaustion. He did not hesitate. "Get inside," he said, stepping back and reaching out to steady her as she stumbled across the threshold. "Get those wet clothes off before you freeze to death." Nora wanted to protest, to maintain some semblance of propriety, but her body was already shutting down. Ethan moved with swift efficiency, grabbing a thick wool blanket from a chest near the fire and holding it up as a screen. "Behind here," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Strip everything off and wrap yourself in this. I will turn my back." She did as instructed with numb, fumbling fingers, her wet dress falling to the floor with a heavy slap. The blanket was rough but blessedly dry, and she wrapped it around herself like armor, her whole body still convulsing with shivers. When she stepped around the blanket screen, Ethan had already pulled a chair close to the stone fireplace and was adding more wood to the flames. "Sit," he commanded, and she sank into the chair gratefully. He disappeared into what she assumed was a bedroom and returned with more blankets, which he draped over her shoulders and tucked around her legs. Then he went to the stove and poured something from a kettle into a tin cup. "Drink this slowly," he said, pressing the warm cup into her hands. "It is just hot water with a little whiskey. It will help." Nora took a sip and felt the liquid burn down her throat, spreading warmth through her chest. She closed her eyes and took another sip, then another, feeling sensation beginning to return to her extremities in painful tingles. When she finally felt capable of speech again, she opened her eyes to find Ethan sitting on a bench across from her, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," she said, her voice still hoarse. "You saved my life." He shook his head slightly. "You would have done the same. Not everyone would have opened their door to a stranger in the night. Then not everyone deserves to call themselves human," Ethan replied simply. He stood and walked to where her wet clothes lay in a sodden heap. "I will hang these to dry. They will not be ready by morning, but I have some things that might fit you until then." Nora watched him work, this stranger who had taken her in without question. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own space, his hands capable and sure. He was probably in his late 20s, she guessed, with a face that was more rugged than handsome, marked by sun and wind and hard work. There was a quietness about him, a sense of solitude that suggested he was not accustomed to company. "I am Nora Sinclair," she said, feeling the need to establish herself as a person rather than just a burden. "I was traveling to Sacramento when the storm caught me." "Ethan Ramsey," he replied, hanging her dress on a line he had strung near the fire. "This is not really a through road." "How did you end up on this trail?" "I think I took a wrong turn somewhere after Truckee," she admitted. "I was trying to avoid the main roads." He glanced at her with those steady gray eyes. "Running from something." Nora hesitated, then decided there was no point in lying to the man who had just saved her life. "Running from debt collectors, more accurately. My husband died 2 months ago. We owed money we cannot pay. I thought it best to leave Nevada." Ethan nodded, asking no further questions. He seemed to understand that everyone who ended up in these mountains had their own story, their own reasons for seeking isolation or escape. He moved to the stove and began preparing food, and Nora realized with surprise that she was ravenously hungry despite her exhaustion. "I do not have much," he said, "but there is bacon and beans and bread I baked yesterday." "Anything would be wonderful," Nora said sincerely. They ate in companionable silence, and Nora found herself studying the cabin more closely. It was a single room with a loft accessible by a ladder, well built and sturdy, with a stone fireplace that looked like it had been constructed with great care. There were shelves holding books, which surprised her, and tools hanging neatly on the walls. Everything was orderly and clean, the home of a man who took pride in his surroundings even if he lived alone. "How long have you been here?" she asked. 3 years, Ethan replied. "I bought this land from a prospector who gave up on finding gold and decided to go back east. I run cattle in the valleys below during the summer, bring them up to the winter pastures, do some logging when the weather allows. It must be lonely," he considered this. "Sometimes, but I prefer my own company to most people's." Nora could understand that sentiment. After weeks of traveling alone, she had grown accustomed to silence, to the absence of conversation. There was a peace in it, even if it sometimes felt like a burden. The storm continued to rage outside, thunder rolling through the mountains and rain hammering against the roof. Ethan stood and gestured to the loft. "You will sleep up there," he said. "There is a good mattress and plenty of blankets. I will stay down here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Nora protested. "You can and you will," Ethan said firmly. "You need proper rest to recover from your exposure." "I have slept in far worse places than a chair by a warm fire." Nora wanted to argue but knew it would be pointless. Besides, the thought of lying down on a real mattress was almost unbearably appealing. She climbed the ladder carefully, still wrapped in her blankets, and found the loft exactly as promised. The bed was simple but well made, with a thick quilt and pillows that smelled faintly of pine and soap. She crawled under the covers and felt warmth begin to seep into her bones at last. "Ethan," she called down softly. "Yes, thank you, truly." There was a pause, then his voice came through the darkness. "Get some rest, Nora Sinclair." She closed her eyes and listened to the storm, but for the first time in months she felt safe, protected. As if the walls of this cabin and the presence of the quiet man downstairs were enough to keep all the hardships of the world at bay, at least for one night. When Nora woke, sunlight was streaming through a small window in the loft, and she could hear sounds of activity below. She sat up slowly, her body aching in 100 places but no longer gripped by the dangerous cold of the night before. The clothes Ethan had mentioned were folded neatly at the foot of the bed, a simple work shirt and a pair of trousers that would be too large but serviceable with a belt. She dressed quickly and climbed down the ladder to find Ethan at the stove, cooking what smelled like eggs and bacon. He glanced up as she descended, and something flickered in his expression, though it was gone before she could identify it. "Your dress is mostly dry," he said, nodding toward the line. "But those will do until you are ready to change. Thank you." Nora walked to the window and looked out at a landscape transformed by sunshine. The storm had cleared completely, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. She could see the valley spread out below, vast and green, dotted with cattle that looked like toys from this height. The mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still capped with snow even in late spring. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It is that," Ethan agreed. He plated food and brought it to the small table. "Eat. Then we need to talk about what happens next." Nora joined him at the table, her stomach growling at the sight and smell of real food. They ate without speaking, but it was a comfortable silence, not awkward or strained. When they had finished, Ethan poured coffee and leaned back in his chair, regarding her seriously. "The nearest town is Truckee, about 8 miles down the mountain," he said. "I can take you there if that is where you want to go. There is a stage that runs through twice a week heading west. You could be in Sacramento in a few days." Nora wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup and tried to think clearly. Sacramento meant her sister, but it also meant arriving as a burden, penniless and grief-stricken, dependent on charity. The thought made something in her chest tighten with shame and reluctance. "What if I do not want to go to Truckee?" she asked quietly. Ethan was silent for a long moment. "Then you need to tell me what you do want." "I want to stop running," Nora said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I want to stop feeling like I am one disaster away from dying in a ditch somewhere. I want to be useful and have a purpose. I want to earn my own way instead of depending on the grudging generosity of relatives who never wanted me in the first place." "Your sister does not want you." "My sister married well, and has made it clear that she considers me a reminder of the poverty we came from. She will take me in because she must, because it is the Christian thing to do, but she will make sure I know every day that I am a burden and a failure." Ethan nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. "Can you cook?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes, I am a good cook." "Can you tend a garden, preserve food, mend clothes?" "Yes to all of those things." "Can you handle being isolated, being away from town for weeks at a time with nothing but mountains and cattle and one stubborn man for company?" Nora's heart began to beat faster. "Are you offering me work?" "I am offering you a place," Ethan said carefully. "I need help running this place. I can manage the cattle and the heavy labor, but I am a terrible cook, and I have been wearing the same 3 shirts with holes in them for 2 years because I cannot sew worth a damn. The garden I tried to plant last year was a disaster. I know how to survive, but I do not know how to make a home. You are offering this to a complete stranger. I am offering it to someone who needs it, and who can offer me something I need in return. That seems like fair dealing to me." Nora looked at him across the table, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. There was no guile in his expression, no hidden agenda that she could detect. He was simply being practical, offering a solution that benefited them both. "I have no money," she said bluntly. "I cannot pay you rent or anything like that. I do not want money, I want help. You work, you contribute, this becomes your home too. Equal partnership. People will talk. A widow living alone with an unmarried man." "There is no one up here to talk," Ethan pointed out. "And when we go to town, you can be my housekeeper if you want a title that satisfies propriety." It was a risk, Nora knew. She barely knew this man. But something in her gut told her that Ethan Ramsey was trustworthy, that his offer was genuine, and that this might be her one chance to build something of her own instead of living as a dependent in someone else's home. "All right," she said, making the decision in a rush before she could second-guess herself. "I will stay. I will work. We will make this partnership succeed." Ethan's face broke into a smile, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his entire appearance, making him look younger and less careworn. He extended his hand across the table and she took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "Welcome home, Nora Sinclair," he said. And just like that, her life changed direction entirely. The first few weeks were an adjustment for both of them. Ethan was accustomed to living alone, to moving through his days in silence, to having complete control over his space and his routines. Nora was used to the constant presence of another person, to the rhythms of married life, to consulting and compromising on every decision. They had to learn to navigate around each other, to establish new patterns that accommodated them both. Nora threw herself into work with fierce determination. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, organized supplies, mended Ethan's worn clothes, and made lists of things they would need from town. She discovered that the garden plot Ethan had mentioned was actually in a perfect location with good soil. It had simply been planted wrong and not tended properly. She spent days clearing it, preparing the beds, and planning what to plant. Ethan, for his part, seemed bemused by the changes but not displeased. He came in from working with the cattle to find hot meals waiting, his shirts repaired and hanging clean on pegs. The cabin transformed from a bachelor's rough quarters into something that felt like an actual home. He watched Nora work with an expression that was equal parts respect and curiosity, as if he could not quite figure her out. They talked more than Nora had expected. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would sit by the fire and share stories. Ethan told her about growing up in Wyoming, about learning to cowboy from his father, about the war that had taken his father and 2 older brothers, leaving him alone at 16 to fend for himself. He talked about drifting for years, working ranches from Montana to Arizona, before finally deciding he wanted his own land, his own place where no one could tell him what to do. Nora told him about her childhood in a cramped apartment in Chicago, about her father's death and her mother's subsequent remarriage to a man who drank away every penny they had. She talked about marrying Thomas at 19, desperate to escape, only to discover that her husband was a dreamer who chased one scheme after another, always convinced that the next venture would make them rich. She talked about the slow accumulation of debts, the gradual wearing down of hope, and finally Thomas's death, which had been almost a relief until she realized how much trouble she was truly in. "You feel guilty about that?" Ethan asked one evening. "About feeling relief?" Sometimes, Nora admitted. I cared about Thomas, but I was never in love with him. I am not sure I even knew what love was supposed to feel like. I just knew I had to get away from my stepfather, and Thomas seemed kind. He was kind in his way, just also weak and impractical. You should not feel guilty for being honest about that. Were you ever married? Nora asked, turning the question back on him. Ethan shook his head. Came close once. A girl in Cheyenne, but she wanted a town life, a house on a street with neighbors, and I wanted this. We both knew it would not work, so we ended it before making promises we could not keep. Do you regret it? He considered this. No. She married a banker and has 3 children and seems happy from what I hear, and I have this. Everyone got what they needed. As spring turned to summer, Nora's garden began to flourish. She planted potatoes and carrots, beans and squash, herbs and greens. She found wild berry patches in the woods and made preserves. She learned to bake bread in Ethan's temperamental oven, eventually mastering the timing and temperature. The cabin's shelves began to fill with jars and supplies, evidence of prosperity and planning for the future. Ethan brought her to Truckee for the first time in mid-June, driving a wagon loaded with lumber he had cut and dressed. Nora wore her own dress, now fully repaired and cleaned, and kept to herself while Ethan conducted his business. A few people gave them curious looks, clearly wondering who she was, but no one asked directly. On the way back, Ethan stopped the wagon and pulled out a package he had kept hidden under the seat. For you, he said, handing it to her. Nora unwrapped it to find fabric for 2 new dresses, a pair of sturdy boots in her size, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. She looked at him with surprise. You did not have to do this. You needed proper clothes, Ethan said simply, and you have earned them 10 times over with all the work you have done. How much do I owe you? Nothing. We are partners, remember. What is mine is yours. It was a dangerous thing for him to say, Nora thought. Dangerous because it made her feel things she had not expected to feel, made her aware of him in ways that went beyond gratitude or partnership. She had been so focused on work, on proving her worth, that she had not let herself acknowledge what was becoming increasingly obvious. She was developing feelings for Ethan Ramsey that had nothing to do with practical arrangements and everything to do with the way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her as an equal, the way he seemed to value her not for what she could give him but for who she was. She pushed the feelings down, told herself she was being foolish. Ethan had offered her shelter and work, nothing more. To complicate that with romantic notions would be disastrous, especially when she had nowhere else to go. But the feelings would not be denied. It happened gradually, in small moments. The way Ethan's hand would linger when he passed her something at the table, the way his eyes would follow her as she moved around the cabin, the way he always made sure she took the more comfortable chair, had the larger portion of meat, got the first cup of fresh coffee in the morning. And on her side, the way her heart would speed up when she heard his boots on the porch, the way she found herself taking extra care with her appearance, the way she caught herself watching him work and admiring the strength in his arms, the sureness of his movements. They danced around each other through July and into August, neither willing to be the first to acknowledge what was growing between them. The turning point came on a blazing hot afternoon when Ethan was repairing the roof and lost his footing, falling hard onto the packed earth of the yard. Nora was at his side in an instant, her heart in her throat. "Are you hurt? Can you move?" Ethan groaned and sat up slowly, testing his limbs. "Nothing broken, just knocked the wind out of me and bruised my pride." "You could have been killed," Nora said, and to her horror, tears began streaming down her face. "You could have fallen wrong and broken your neck and died right here, and I would have been alone again." Ethan looked up at her, and something in his expression shifted. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Hey, I am all right. I am right here." "I cannot lose you," Nora whispered. "I cannot lose this. I have been so happy here, happier than I have ever been in my life, and the thought of it being taken away." She could not finish the sentence. Ethan stood slowly, keeping his hands on her shoulders. They were standing very close now, close enough that she could see the lighter flecks in his gray eyes, could count the sun lines at the corners. "Nora," he said, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen. And if you do not feel the same way, we will never speak of it again, and nothing will change between us." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "All right. This stopped being a practical arrangement for me about 2 months ago," Ethan said. "Maybe sooner. Maybe from the first morning when I saw you in my clothes with your hair down and you smiled at me over breakfast. I do not know exactly when it happened, but I know that what I feel for you now is not partnership or friendship or anything simple like that. I am in love with you, Nora Sinclair. I love your strength and your determination and the way you laugh when the chickens do something stupid. I love how you turn everything you touch into something better. I love the sound of your voice and the way you argue with me when you think I am wrong. I love coming home at the end of the day and seeing you here, knowing that you chose to stay, that you built this life with me." Nora's breath caught. "Ethan, you do not have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I know this is not what you signed up for. I know you came here for shelter and work, not for some cowboy to fall in love with you. But I could not keep it to myself anymore, not when I spend every day wanting to touch you, wanting to hold you, wanting to tell you that you are the best thing that has ever happened to me." For answer, Nora rose on her toes and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question rather than a declaration, but Ethan responded with a hunger that matched her own, pulling her close and deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. "I love you too," Nora gasped when they finally broke apart. "I have been so afraid to admit it, afraid I was fooling myself or wanting something I could not have. But I love you, Ethan Ramsey. I love your kindness and your quiet strength and the way you made me feel valuable again when I thought I was worth nothing. I love this life we have built. I love waking up every day knowing you are here. I love you." Ethan kissed her again, slower this time, reverent. When he pulled back, he was smiling that rare, full smile that transformed his whole face. "Marry me," he said. "Not because we should for propriety's sake, but because I want to spend the rest of my life with you, because I want to make this official and real and permanent. Will you marry me, Nora?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in Truckee, in a simple ceremony at the church with the minister and 2 witnesses pulled from the street. Nora wore one of the dresses Ethan had bought her, with wildflowers from the mountain meadows in her hair. Ethan wore his best shirt and looked more nervous than she had ever seen him. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her so thoroughly that the witnesses laughed and applauded. They spent one night at the hotel in Truckee, a luxury neither of them was accustomed to, with a real bath and a soft bed and privacy to finally consummate their marriage. Ethan was gentle and patient, mindful of Nora's limited experience, and by the time the night was over, Nora understood at last what it meant to be truly loved by someone, to give yourself to someone completely and have that gift treasured and reciprocated. In the morning, they drove back up the mountain to their cabin, to their home, and began their life together as husband and wife in earnest. The years that followed were not without their challenges. That first winter was brutal, with snow that piled 10 feet high and temperatures that dropped so low the windows frosted on the inside despite the constantly burning fire. They were snowed in for 3 weeks at one point, unable to reach town or check on the cattle sheltering in the lower valleys. But they had each other, and plenty of supplies thanks to Nora's careful preparations, and they made the best of it, playing cards and reading aloud from Ethan's books, and making love under piles of quilts while the wind howled outside. In the spring, disaster struck when a late freeze killed most of Nora's garden seedlings and several of Ethan's calves. They had to tighten their belts and make do with less, selling some of their stored timber to make ends meet. It was stressful and frightening, a reminder of how precarious their existence was, how dependent on weather and luck and their own hard work. But they weathered it together, supporting each other through the worry and the setbacks. And when summer came and the surviving garden flourished and the remaining cattle thrived, they counted themselves fortunate and wiser for the experience. Nora discovered she was pregnant in the fall of 1877. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Ethan. When she finally shared the news one evening after dinner, he went completely still, his eyes wide. "A baby," he said. "We are going to have a baby in the spring," Nora confirmed. "March or April, I think." Ethan let out a whoop of joy that probably echoed across the valley and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are having a baby. I am going to be a father." He was immediately protective to the point of being ridiculous, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, fretting when she climbed the ladder to the loft, insisting she sit down every time she looked tired. Nora had to firmly remind him that pregnant women had been working for all of human history and that she was not made of glass. "I know," Ethan said, looking sheepish. "I just want you and the baby to be safe." "We will be," Nora assured him. "But you have to let me live my life, Ethan." "I will be careful, but I cannot spend 6 months sitting in a chair." They compromised. Nora continued her work but let Ethan take over the heavier tasks. She focused on sewing baby clothes and preparing the loft to accommodate a cradle Ethan was building with meticulous care. As winter set in again, they spent evenings discussing names and making plans for the future, imagining what their child would be like, whether they would have Ethan's gray eyes or Nora's dark hair. The baby came on a clear April morning in 1878, after a labor that lasted through the night. There was no doctor available, no midwife, just Ethan following the instructions. Nora gasped out between contractions, terrified and determined. When their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Ethan cut the cord with shaking hands and placed the baby on Nora's chest, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "You are perfect. You are the strongest person I have ever known." They named him James Thomas, after Ethan's father and Nora's late first husband, a way of honoring the past while looking toward the future. Jamie, as they quickly began calling him, was a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and his father's gray eyes. He transformed their lives completely, filling the cabin with noise and chaos, and an overwhelming love that neither of them had been prepared for. Ethan was a devoted father from the start, taking Jamie out in a sling while he worked, talking to the baby constantly, even though Jamie could not possibly understand. Nora would watch them from the cabin window, her heart swelling with joy at the sight of her husband, this quiet, solitary man who had once lived alone in the mountains, completely besotted with his son. Jamie was 2 when Nora became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because she was stronger and healthier than she had been before. Their daughter arrived in the winter of 1880, during a snowstorm that seemed fitting for the fierce little girl who came into the world with her fists clenched and her face red with indignation. They named her Sarah Grace, and she was as different from her brother as night from day. Where Jamie was cautious and thoughtful, Sarah was bold and impulsive. Where Jamie would study something carefully before attempting it, Sarah would simply launch herself at challenges with absolute confidence. She kept them on their toes and made them laugh and tested the limits of their patience, but they adored her completely. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of seasons passing and children growing. Ethan expanded his cattle operation gradually, purchasing more land in the valleys, building a reputation for quality stock. Nora's garden became famous in Truckee, with people willing to pay good prices for her vegetables and preserves. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, secure in ways that neither of them had ever been before. In 1882, when Jamie was 4 and Sarah was 2, they made a decision that had been brewing for months. They would build a larger house, something with proper bedrooms for the children, more space for their growing family and operations. It took 2 years of planning and saving and hard work, with Ethan doing much of the construction himself, aided by hired men from town when needed. The new house was built on a spot just below the original cabin, with a view that stretched for miles across the valley. It had 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a cast iron stove, a parlor with windows that let in floods of sunlight, and a wrap-around porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains. When it was finished in the spring of 1884, they moved in with ceremony and celebration, while the old cabin became a guest house and storage building. Nora stood on the new porch that first evening, with Sarah asleep on her shoulder and Jamie holding her hand, watching Ethan tend to the animals in the yard below. 8 years had passed since that stormy night when she had stumbled to his door half dead, desperate and alone. 8 years since he had opened that door and said words that had changed everything. "This is your home now." That was what he had meant when he said it, she realized. Not just that night, not just until the storm passed, but forever. He had opened his life to her completely, offering her a place and a purpose and eventually his heart, with a generosity that still took her breath away. "Mama, look," Jamie said, pointing at the sky where the first stars were appearing. "There is the Big Dipper." "So it is," Nora agreed, squeezing his hand gently. Ethan had been teaching him the constellations, and Jamie loved finding them each night. Ethan climbed the porch steps and wrapped his arms around all of them, creating a warm circle of family. "What do you think?" he asked. "Was it worth all the work?" "It is perfect," Nora said, leaning into his embrace. "Everything is perfect," and she meant it. Not because their life was without difficulty or challenge, but because they had built something real and lasting together, something that would outlast them and continue through their children and their children's children. They had taken a moment of desperate need and transformed it into a love story that would echo through generations. 2 more children followed in the years after that. Another son, Daniel, born in 1885, who inherited his mother's dark hair and quick mind. And finally, another daughter, Elizabeth, arriving in 1888 as a surprise when Nora thought their family was complete. Beth, as they called her, was the baby of the family and shamefully spoiled by her older siblings, but also remarkably sweet-natured and kind. The house that had seemed so spacious when they built it was now filled with noise and laughter, and the controlled chaos of 4 children. Meals were boisterous affairs with everyone talking over each other. Evenings were spent helping with homework, mediating sibling disputes, telling stories and singing songs. Ethan taught all the children to ride, to respect the land and the animals, to work hard and honor their commitments. Nora taught them to read and do figures, to cook and preserve food, to value education and kindness. Jamie, as the oldest, took his responsibilities seriously, helping his father with the cattle and learning the business side of ranching. By the time he was 12, he could handle a rope as well as any adult and had a natural gift for understanding animal behavior. Sarah, true to form, insisted on doing everything her brother did, refusing to be left behind because she was a girl. Ethan, to his credit, never tried to stop her, teaching her the same skills he taught Jamie and praising her when she mastered them. Daniel was the scholar of the family, more interested in books than cattle, often found reading in unlikely places when he was supposed to be doing chores. Ethan worried about this at first, wondering if his second son would be happy on the ranch. But Nora reminded him that the world needed thinkers as well as workers, and that Daniel would find his own path in time. Little Beth was still too young to show her talents, but she followed her siblings everywhere, watching and learning and storing it all away. In 1891, Nora's sister died unexpectedly in Sacramento, leaving behind a note that was delivered by a lawyer. In it, she apologized for her coldness and pride, admitted that she had been wrong to judge Nora, and expressed hope that Nora had found happiness wherever life had taken her. It was not a full reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement, and Nora found that it gave her a sense of closure she had not known she needed. You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had made it to Sacramento that night? Ethan asked after she shared the letter with him. Nora considered this. I used to in the early days, but now I cannot even imagine it. That would have been someone else's life, not mine. This is mine. You are mine. Our children are mine. This is the life I was meant to have. I thank God for that storm, Ethan said quietly. I thank God you took that wrong turn and ended up on my mountain and knocked on my door. Best thing that ever happened to me. To both of us, Nora said, kissing him softly. They had been married 15 years by then, and they still touched each other constantly, still found reasons to be alone together when they could steal moments away from their children, still looked at each other with the same love and desire that had first brought them together. If anything, their bond had deepened over the years, strengthened by shared challenges and triumphs, by the life they had built together stone by stone, choice by choice. In 1893, when Jamie turned 15, he asked if he could start his own small herd, buying young cattle with money he had saved from doing extra work for neighboring ranches. Ethan agreed, lending him the additional funds he needed with a formal contract that laid out repayment terms. It was a chance for Jamie to prove himself, to start building his own future, and he threw himself into it with characteristic determination. Sarah, not to be outdone, asked if she could have her own garden plot to grow flowers rather than just vegetables. She wanted to sell bouquets and dried arrangements in Truckee, thinking there would be a market for such things. Nora helped her set it up, and to everyone's surprise, Sarah's venture was immediately successful, with ladies from town placing regular orders for her arrangements. Daniel announced at 13 that he wanted to be a teacher. He had been helping the younger children with their lessons and discovered he loved it, loved the moment when something clicked in a student's mind and understanding dawned. Ethan and Nora discussed it privately and decided to support his dream, beginning to set aside money for his education. The years flowed past like water, each one bringing changes and growth. Jamie courted and married a rancher's daughter from Truckee when he was 21, a sensible girl named Emma who loved ranch life as much as he did. They built a house on the far end of the Ramsey property and started their own family, making Ethan and Nora grandparents in 1898 with the arrival of a grandson they named Ethan Thomas Ramsey. Sarah, independent as always, went to San Francisco at 19 to study art, shocking everyone. She returned 2 years later with a husband she had met there, a photographer named Henry Wright, who documented the changing American West. They divided their time between the city and the ranch, with Sarah continuing her flower business and Henry building a reputation for his powerful images. Daniel did indeed become a teacher, attending normal school in Sacramento and returning to teach at the schoolhouse in Truckee. He married another teacher, a woman named Catherine from Oregon, and they became pillars of the community, known for their dedication to their students. Beth, the baby, married at 18 to a young veterinarian who set up practice in Truckee. She was the only one of their children who lived in town rather than on the land, but she visited constantly, bringing her husband to Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. By 1905, the original cabin where it had all begun was surrounded by a thriving family compound. The main house still stood at the center, where Ethan and Nora lived and hosted gatherings that sometimes included 30 people. Jamie and Emma's house was visible across the meadow. The old cabin had been renovated and expanded for when Sarah and Henry visited. Daniel and Catherine had built a summer cottage near the lake on the property. Beth and her husband came up from town almost every weekend. Ethan was 54 now, his hair more silver than dark, his face deeply lined by sun and wind and the passage of time. But he was still strong, still active, still waking every morning with purpose and ending every day with satisfaction at work well done. He had handed much of the daily operation of the ranch over to Jamie, but he still rode out most days, still made the major decisions, still kept his hand on the tiller. Nora was 53, her own dark hair streaked with gray, her hands marked by decades of hard work. But her eyes were still bright, her smile still ready, her energy seemingly boundless. She oversaw a household that included not just her and Ethan but often various grandchildren, teaching them the same skills she had once taught their parents. On a summer evening, with family gathered for someone's birthday, the celebration moved to the porch after dinner. Children ran and played in the yard. Adults talked and laughed, sharing news and stories. Ethan stood at the railing watching it all, feeling the weight of contentment in his chest. Nora joined him, sliding her hand into his as naturally as breathing. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Ethan said simply. "Look at what we made, Nora. Look at all of this." She followed his gaze across the gathering, at their children and their children's children, at the land they had tended and improved, at the legacy they had created. "We did do well, did we not? Better than well. We built something that will last, something that matters." "Because you opened your door that night," Nora said softly. "Because you did not turn away a stranger who had nothing to offer but need and gratitude." Ethan turned to face her, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "You had everything to offer. You were everything I needed, I just did not know it yet. You made me whole, Nora. You made all of this possible." "We made it possible," she corrected. "Together. That is how it has always been with us." He kissed her then, softly and sweetly, the kiss of two people who had loved each other for nearly 30 years and expected to love each other for 30 more. Around them, their children smiled and their grandchildren giggled, but neither of them paid attention. In that moment, there was only the two of them, the way it had been in the beginning, the way it would always be at the core of everything they had built. Later, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Ethan and Nora sat on their porch watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. These were the moments Nora treasured most, these quiet times with just the two of them, when they could simply be together without the demands of family and work pressing in. "You remember what I said that first night?" Ethan asked. "When you asked what would happen next?" You said you could take me to Truckee, that I could catch the stage to Sacramento. After that, when you said you did not want to go, Nora thought back, reaching through the years to that conversation that had changed everything. You asked if I could cook, if I could handle isolation. I said I would offer you a place, Ethan said. I said this would become your home. I meant it, but I did not know then what it would really mean. I thought I was offering you work and shelter. I did not know I was offering you my whole life, my whole heart, everything I would ever be or have. I knew, Nora said quietly. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep down I knew. When you said this was my home, something in me recognized it as truth, as destiny. I was meant to end up here, Ethan. I was meant to find you. Everything that came before, all the hardship and pain and struggle, it was all leading me to that door, to that moment, to you. I love you, Ethan said, the words as fresh and meaningful as the first time he had spoken them. I love you more today than yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than today. That is how it has been every single day since I met you. And I love you, Nora replied. My rescuer, my partner, my husband, my home. They sat in comfortable silence as night descended fully, the mountains dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. It was the same view Nora had seen that first morning when she woke in Ethan's loft, but everything was different now. Then she had been a stranger, a refugee, someone with no place in the world. Now she was anchored, rooted, home in every sense of the word. The years continued to pass, as they always do, bringing more changes and challenges. In 1910, Ethan suffered a minor heart episode that scared them all, but from which he recovered with typical stubbornness. The incident made them both more aware of their mortality, more conscious of treasuring each day. They began taking long walks together every evening, rain or shine, talking about everything and nothing, simply enjoying each other's company. In 1912, their grandson, the first Ethan Thomas, graduated from college with a degree in agricultural science and returned to help modernize the ranch. He brought new ideas about breeding and land management, about diversifying income streams and planning for the future. The younger Ethan and his father Jamie worked together to implement these changes, with the elder Ethan serving as advisor and sounding board. Sarah's photography career, aided by her husband's talents, brought attention to the family and the region. Her images of ranch life, of cattle drives and roundups, of children playing in mountain streams and women working in gardens, captured something essential about the American West at the turn of the century. Galleries in San Francisco and even New York displayed her work, and she used her platform to advocate for conservation and thoughtful land use. Daniel and Catherine's school became a model for rural education, with students coming from all over the county to attend. They developed innovative methods for teaching children of different ages together, for incorporating practical skills alongside academic subjects. Daniel wrote a book about his experiences that was published in 1914 and used by teachers throughout the West. Beth and her husband expanded their veterinary practice, eventually taking on partners and opening a second office. They became known for their expertise with large animals and their willingness to travel to remote ranches to provide care. Through it all, Ethan and Nora remained the center around which the family revolved. Their house was the gathering place, the heart of the operation, the place where everyone came for advice, comfort, celebration, and solace. Nora's kitchen was always full of food, always ready for whoever might show up. Ethan's study was where business was conducted, deals were made, problems were solved. They became legendary figures in Truckee and the surrounding region, known for their fairness, their hard work, their devotion to each other. Young couples sought their advice on marriage. Struggling ranchers asked Ethan for guidance. Women came to Nora with questions about everything from cooking to child-rearing to managing difficult men. They had become elders in the truest sense, respected and valued for their wisdom and experience. In the spring of 1918, on a day so beautiful it seemed crafted by divine hand specifically for the occasion, the family gathered to celebrate Ethan and Nora's 40th wedding anniversary. Everyone was there, 4 children with their spouses, 12 grandchildren ranging in age from infancy to 20, and even 2 great-grandchildren. The celebration lasted all day, with food and music and speeches and laughter. Jamie, as the oldest, stood to offer a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed us what love looks like, what partnership looks like, what it means to build a life together based on respect and trust and dedication. You gave us roots and wings, a foundation and the freedom to grow. Everything good in my life, everything I am, comes from you. Thank you." Sarah spoke next. "You never tried to make me be anything I was not. You never told me I could not do something because I was a girl. You let me dream and supported those dreams even when they took me far from home. You taught me that love means wanting the other person to be fully themselves. Thank you." Daniel's words were simple but profound. "You taught me that being a man is not about physical strength or dominance, but about character and integrity. You taught me that intelligence and education are valuable, that thinking is as important as doing. You gave me permission to be myself. Thank you." Beth, the baby even now at 30, cried through her entire speech. "You made me feel safe and loved every single day of my life. You created a home where everyone belonged, where there was always room for one more. You taught me that family is everything. Thank you." When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stood with Nora's hand firmly in his, looking out at the faces of their descendants. "Everything you see here," he said, gesturing broadly, "all of this, every bit of it, exists because your mother had the courage to knock on a stranger's door in the middle of a storm. Exists because she chose to stay when she could have left. Exists because she worked alongside me to build something from nothing. I was alone before Nora. I was surviving, but I was not living. She gave me life. She gave me all of you, and I am grateful for that every single day." Nora could not speak for the tears that choked her, but she did not need to. Her family knew. They had always known. The love between their parents was the foundation on which everything else was built, the bedrock that had never wavered, the constant in a changing world. As the sun set that evening and the celebration began to wind down, Ethan and Nora walked together to the old cabin where it had all begun. They had not been inside in years, but the building was still maintained, still sturdy and sound. Ethan opened the door and they stepped inside, transported instantly back to that night 42 years earlier. "You remember how scared I was?" Nora asked, looking around the single room that had once seemed so large and now seemed impossibly small. "You remember how scared I was?" Ethan countered. "I had lived alone for 3 years. I had convinced myself I did not need anyone. And then you showed up and turned my entire life upside down. Best decision I ever made, knocking on this door. Best decision I ever made, opening it." They stood in the center of the cabin, holding each other, surrounded by memories. This was where they had shared their first meal, where they had sat by the fire and told their stories, where they had fallen in love without quite realizing it was happening, where he had asked her to stay and she had said yes. "This is your home now," Ethan said softly, repeating the words from that long-ago day. "It has always been your home. "You are my home, Nora. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." "And you are mine," Nora replied. "My shelter in every storm. My constant. My love." They kissed there in the cabin, in the place where their story had begun, and it felt like closing a circle, like bringing everything full around to where it had started. They were no longer young, no longer in the flush of new love, but what they had was deeper and richer than anything youth could offer. They had history. They had proof. They had 40 years of choosing each other every single day, of building a life that mattered, of creating something that would outlast them. When they finally left the cabin and returned to the main house, their family was waiting on the porch. Someone had lit lanterns, and in the warm glow, 3 generations gathered to sing old songs and tell familiar stories. Grandchildren sat on grandparents' laps. Great-grandchildren slept in their parents' arms. It was everything Nora had never dared to dream of during those dark days of her first widowhood, when she had been alone and desperate and certain she would die unremembered and unmourned. Instead, she had built a legacy. She had created a family that would continue long after she was gone, carrying forward the values and the love that she and Ethan had nurtured. She had transformed one moment of desperate need into a lifetime of purpose and meaning. As the night grew late and family members began departing for their own homes, Ethan and Nora said their goodbyes and climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same bedroom they had shared for over 30 years. They prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of decades, moving around each other seamlessly. In bed, Nora curled into Ethan's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. 40 years, she mused. Where did they go? "Right here," Ethan said, his arms tightening around her. "Every day right here with you, the best years of my life. Mine too, even the hard parts, even the scary parts, all of it because I got to share it with you." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped around each other, as content and complete as two people could be. The years after the anniversary were gentler, slower. Ethan and Nora gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting Jamie and young Ethan take full control. They still lived in the main house, still hosted gatherings and offered advice, but they also gave themselves permission to rest, to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They traveled a little, taking the train to San Francisco to visit Sarah, going to Sacramento to see Daniel and Catherine's school. They spent weeks at a time doing nothing but reading and walking and enjoying each other's company. They had earned their ease and they embraced it. In 1923, Ethan fell ill with influenza. It was not the devastating pandemic strain that had swept the world a few years earlier, but he was 72 years old, and his body did not fight it off as easily as it once would have. For several weeks, the family held its collective breath, gathering at the house, taking turns sitting with him, praying and hoping. Nora never left his side. She slept in a chair next to the bed, sponged him down when fever raged, coaxed him to drink water and broth, talked to him constantly whether he was conscious or not. She told him stories of their life together, reminded him of moments they had shared, made plans for what they would do when he recovered. "You have to get better," she told him one night when his breathing was particularly labored and she was particularly frightened. "You have to stay with me, Ethan. I'm not ready to let you go. I will never be ready. You promised me forever and I am holding you to that." Whether her will alone was enough to pull him through, or whether his body simply decided it was not yet time, Ethan began to improve. Slowly, gradually, he grew stronger until one morning he woke with clear eyes and demanded real food. The crisis had passed, but it had left its mark. Ethan never quite regained all his strength. He moved more slowly, tired more easily, needed more rest. He was mortal in a way he had not seemed before, and it scared them both, this reminder that their time together would not last forever. They talked about it one evening as they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "I do not want to leave you," Ethan said quietly. "The thought of you being alone again after everything, it breaks my heart." "Then do not leave," Nora said fiercely. "Stay with me. We still have years left. We will have years." "I will stay as long as I can," Ethan promised. "And when I cannot anymore, you have to promise me something." "Anything?" "Promise me you will not let grief destroy you. Promise me you will keep living, keep being part of this family we built. They need you, Nora. The children, the grandchildren, all of them. They need your strength and your wisdom. Promise me." "I promise," Nora said, tears streaming down her face. "But you have to promise me the same thing. If I go first, you do not give up. You keep going. You stay for them." "I promise," Ethan agreed, though they both suspected Nora would outlive him. She was younger, healthier, and had an inner core of steel that suggested she would endure long after he was gone. But as it happened, they were granted more time than either expected. The scare with influenza passed, and Ethan stabilized. He would never be as robust as he had been, but he had good days and bad days, and the good days outnumbered the bad. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928 with another huge family gathering, now including 3 great-grandchildren with a 4th on the way. Ethan was 81. Nora was 76. They moved slowly and carefully, but they moved together, still holding hands, still touching constantly, still finishing each other's sentences. Their love had not dimmed with age. If anything, it had distilled into something purer, more essential. They needed each other like breath, like water, like the very foundation of the earth beneath their feet. In the spring of 1930, on a morning so ordinary it should have been remarkable only for its ordinariness, Ethan woke with pain in his chest. Not severe, not dramatic, just a pressure that made him breathe shallowly. He said nothing to Nora, not wanting to worry her, but she knew him too well. "What is wrong?" she demanded immediately. "Nothing, just indigestion." "Ethan Ramsey, you are a terrible liar. Tell me what is happening." He admitted to the chest pain, and Nora sent for Beth's husband, the veterinarian who had some medical training. The doctor came quickly and examined Ethan with a grave expression. "It is your heart," he said quietly. "It is wearing out, Ethan. I am sorry. How long?" Ethan asked calmly, as if inquiring about the weather. "There is no way to know for certain. Days, weeks, months, but I do not think years." Nora felt the world tilt beneath her feet, but she forced herself to remain steady. They had known this was coming. They had prepared as best they could. Now they would face it together, as they had faced everything else. The family was informed, and over the following weeks, there was a steady stream of visitors. Children and grandchildren came to say goodbye, to share memories, to tell Ethan what he had meant to them. He bore it with grace and humor, joking that he was not dead yet, that they should save their pretty speeches for the funeral. But with Nora, he was honest about his fear. "I do not want to leave you," he said over and over. "I hate that I am leaving you." "You are not leaving by choice," Nora reminded him. "And you will never truly leave me, Ethan. You are part of me. You are woven into every fiber of who I am. Death cannot change that." They spent Ethan's final weeks doing simple things, sitting on the porch watching the sun rise and set, looking through old photographs and remembering, talking about their children and grandchildren, marveling at what they had created, holding each other through the nights, treasuring every moment of closeness. Ethan died on a June morning with the windows open and a breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers through the room. Nora was beside him, her hand in his, her voice the last thing he heard as she whispered that she loved him, that she would always love him, that he could rest now. The funeral was held at the ranch, on a hillside overlooking the valley where Ethan had spent more than 50 years building his life. It seemed like the entire county turned out to pay their respects. The family buried him with ceremony and tears, sharing stories of his kindness, his integrity, his devotion to Nora and his children. Nora stood dry-eyed through most of it, her grief too deep for tears, too profound for public display. It was only later, alone in the bedroom they had shared, that she finally allowed herself to break down, sobbing into his pillow, clutching his shirts, feeling the enormity of his absence like a physical wound. But she had promised him she would keep going, and Nora Sinclair Ramsey had never broken a promise in her life. So she got up the next morning and the morning after that. She joined her family for meals. She held her great-grandchildren and told them stories about their great-grandfather. She tended her garden and supervised the kitchen and remained the heart of the family, even as her own heart felt shattered beyond repair. Gradually, slowly, the sharp edge of grief dulled into something more manageable. Not acceptance, never that, but accommodation. She learned to live with the absence, to carry the weight of it without being crushed. She found joy again in small things, in a grandchild's laughter, in the first tomatoes of summer, in sitting on the porch and watching the valley where Ethan had loved to work. She lived 7 more years without him. 7 years of watching her family continue to grow and thrive, of seeing the legacy they had built together extend into yet another generation. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, a beloved matriarch whose word was law and whose love was limitless. Nora died peacefully in her sleep in 1937, at the age of 85, in the same bed where Ethan had died. Her children found her in the morning, looking peaceful and almost young again, her face relaxed in a way it had not been since Ethan's death. On her bedside table was a photograph from their 50th anniversary, showing the two of them holding hands and smiling at each other with undimmed love. They buried her next to Ethan on the hillside, and as her coffin was lowered into the ground, a sudden wind swept across the valley, bending the grass and rustling through the pines, as if the mountains themselves were acknowledging the passing of one of their own. At the wake afterward, held in the main house that Nora and Ethan had built, the family gathered to remember and celebrate. Jamie, now 70 years old himself, stood to offer a final tribute. "My parents' story could have ended that first night," he said. "When my mother came to the door desperate and dying, when my father could have turned her away but chose to help instead. But it did not end there. It began there. And from that single choice, from that one moment of compassion and courage, all of this grew." He gestured around the room, at the dozens of people present, at the house itself, at the land visible through the windows. "We are all here because on a stormy night in 1876, 2 lonely people found each other. Because they chose love over fear, partnership over solitude, commitment over convenience. They showed us how to build a life that matters, how to create something that lasts. And though they are both gone now, their legacy continues. It will continue through us, through our children, through generations yet unborn. That is the gift they gave us. That is the love they shared." After the funeral, after everyone had gone home, after the house had been cleaned and the leftovers distributed, and life had begun its slow return to a new normal, Jamie's son Thomas walked up to the old cabin where it had all begun. The building was over 60 years old now, weathered but still standing, still sturdy. He opened the door and stepped inside, trying to imagine that night so long ago when his grandmother had appeared out of the storm, and his grandfather had changed both their lives with a few simple words. "This is your home now." It had been true then, and it remained true. This was home for all of them, because two people had chosen to build it together, because they had transformed a moment of need into a lifetime of love, because they had proven that the best things in life come not from luck or chance, but from the choices we make and the commitments we keep. Thomas left the cabin and walked to the hillside where his grandparents were buried. Two simple headstones marked the spot, with their names and dates and a single line carved beneath, "Together always." It was true, he thought. In life and in death, they were together. And the love they had shared continued to echo through the valley, through the family, through the very land itself. It would echo for generations to come, a reminder that true love is not just a feeling but a choice, made over and over again, day after day, year after year, until it becomes the foundation of everything that follows. The sun was setting as Thomas made his way back to the main house, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. In the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children's laughter carried on the breeze. It was the same view his grandparents had cherished, the same land they had loved, the same life they had built. And it was all still here, thriving and growing, testament to a love that had started with a knock on a door in the middle of a storm and had grown into something eternal. "This is your home now." Those 5 simple words, spoken with compassion and conviction, had changed everything. They had rescued a widow from certain death. They had given a lonely cowboy a purpose and a partner. They had created a family that would span generations. They had proven that home is not just a place but a choice, not just shelter but sanctuary, not just survival but belonging. And on this land, in this valley, beneath these mountains, that home would continue. The main house would welcome more grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The old cabin would stand as a monument to beginnings. The hillside would hold the remains of those who had built it all, their spirits woven into the very fabric of the place they had loved. Because on a stormy night in 1876, a widow begged for shelter, and a cowboy said 5 words that changed the world. "This is your home now." And it was. Forever and always it was home,